Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. And it was funny, we had sirens going by, so if you heard a delay, it was just so that I could wait for the trucks to go by and not hear the sirens. But let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Tips and Tools for Creating Compelling Visuals webinar. Please let us know in the chat box if you're having any troubles hearing the audio, if you need us to speak louder, and we'll troubleshoot that right away. And this is the last event in our 5th annual 21st Century New Media Best Practices webinar training series. And I'm kind of sad that we're not going to be joining each other in a monthly fashion to have these awesome conversations. But some of you that are joining new, my name is Lisa Peterson, and I'm a new media education specialist with the sponsors of the event. That's the Center for Public Health Practice and the Center for Health Leadership here at UC Berkeley School of Public Health. And I just want to give a big shout out of thanks for those that have joined us for multiple events in this series and in past iterations of this series. It's really helped to add to the value, and we appreciate all your contributions. And I think everyone probably, I have a sense you'll join me in being excited about this particular topic and to be able to have the opportunity to learn from and be inspired by what our guest speakers are going to share today. Because I know for myself, I'm not a professional designer, not a professional photographer or an artist by trade. And I think it can feel pretty daunting to figure out how best to create and work with visual content and then know if you're having impact. And I think for many of us working in this sector, we're often wearing multiple hats, and this is just one of many. So, and then combine that with the rise of visual storytelling and social media and other digital communications. Feels like it's never been more important to find ways to help build capacity in this area. So that's why I think we're going to have some great opportunity here to learn and be inspired by our presenters who I'll share a little bit about. We have AJ Titong, the communications specialist from the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. And we also have Matt Scharpnick, who's the co-founder and chief strategy officer from Elefint Designs. And I will mention that unfortunately our third speaker, Vicki Hammerstedt from the Berkeley Advanced Media Institute, is not able to join us today. She had a sudden family emergency to tend to, and we're wishing her well, and we're also hoping to have the opportunity to potentially partner with her in a future session. So stand by on that. And I'll also be here as our tech support and to help facilitate our conversation together. A little bit about where we're going today. I'll do a little bit about housekeeping, and then AJ is going to take us on a journey to learn how the Health Forum is leveraging visual storytelling and why. Next, after some Q&A, Matt's going to take us on a deeper dive and share some case studies to help reveal some design principles and best practices. And then we'll also have time after Matt's for Q&A at the end, and then do a brief wrap-up. So a little bit about housekeeping in case you didn't know. I have everyone on mute, and if for some reason your phone becomes unmuted, please be sure to enter *6 to keep it on mute. We have the chat box over to the left, which is our way to engage with you and you with us. And we invite you to enter any questions or comments there in the chat box during presentation, and I'll monitor it, and we'll try to address them during the Q&A. And also, we will be sending out links to the webinar recording, the slides, and any resources that we have in an email after the event. So stay tuned for that. And for those of you that are interested in joining the conversation online, I invite you to use our hashtag. That's CHLNM15. And before we hand it over to AJ, I just wanted to get a bit of a temperature read. We have a poll here. We would really like to learn from you. Just get a sense, what is your biggest challenge in creating compelling visuals right now? Let us know. I think having an understanding of how to have impact, it's like, why are we doing this? How can we get where we need to go is a big one, definitely. And I think that, we generally have people that are just getting started and also that are hoping to take it to the next level. And I know that our speakers are going to be able to help us address some of these issues, whether it is getting started or it's having the resources and time, or really how do you know if this is having impact. So thanks very much for participating in the poll. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to AJ. So excited to have you here, AJ. Are you there?
I'm here.
Great.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. And folks, if you want in the chat box, if you have any trouble with audio, let us know and we'll troubleshoot that. And take it away, AJ.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So before I get started with my presentation, I did want to introduce the organization that I am a part of. It's called the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and we influence policy, mobilize communities, and strengthen programs and organizations to improve the health of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. If you didn't catch it already, our name is really long. So as a side note, I will be referring to the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum in my presentation as the Health Forum. And a little bit about me. I have been a communication specialist at the Health Forum for a little over 6 years, and I manage a lot of the online campaigns in the organization's publication design and dissemination. So let me get started. Before we get into the design strategies and look at some examples of compelling visuals that I think Matt will get into, today I want to help you find ways to identify your audience. Because what impact do your visuals really bring if you aren't messaging your visuals to the right audience? So in that, I also want to go over what types of content, whether it be data or individual or organizational stories, that make for great visual storytelling. Some of you may already know that visual storytelling and storytelling alone are very powerful strategies in exposing the truths, challenges, and successes that people face every day. So storytelling in all paints a picture of reality not a lot of people are aware of. Lastly, I'd like to go over different storytelling tips and compare using different design tools. For example, what kind of visuals do you use to tell your story? Where can you get your visuals, so maybe online? And lastly, what design programs or design software programs are best used for skills to create these visuals, and what kind of capacity do you have in your agency to create them? So let me jump into it. As a communications person who's been working in the nonprofit world for some time now, I learned that the one thing you can't get away with is not knowing who your audience is. Today I want to go over some key strategies to identify your audience and how you can better communicate with them if you know who they are and what they want. I'll speak on different communications components for your visuals, such as the subject, which is here. What is your subject of your visual? So this is the first thing that I like to talk about with people. Do you have compelling data to share? Do you have a narrative that you want to share? Do you have information from a research that you conducted with your agency or that you just recently studied? And do you have helpful information to share with other people? Sorry. Let's think about the purpose of your visuals. So this is the second prong until I kind of figure out who your audience is. So what is your goal in creating your visual? Are you trying to shed light on an issue that you know about? And think about what type of action or reaction you want people to take after they view your visual. And then let's go back to, so who is the audience? We talked about the subject, the purpose, and the audience. I'm going to go through a little bit about how to understand our audience, and so it comes down to this. What does your audience care about? And then maybe brainstorming values that your audience hold dear to their heart. So what's important to your audience, and how is what is important to them help you kind of inform the visuals that you create? So the definition of value, of course, in the Oxford Dictionary is the regard that something is held to deserve the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. So in a sentence, your support is of great value. And so oftentimes our audiences at the Health Forum are policymakers. It's in our mission to influence policy around the health of our communities. So to give you a sense of like what the values of what we think these policymakers are, so we look to our policymakers to adhere to the fair treatment of all communities. And so it's important that their values is about fairness. Another value that we think our policymakers have is that they are law-abiding people. And another value that our policymakers have is that they care about our communities. So these are the values of our audience. This is what we know about them, and this is how we can use our visuals to appeal to them. You also have to think about it as, do you need to share knowledge, build will, or reinforce action through your visuals? How will you get your audience to do those things knowing what their values are? So again, before you get started on even like concepting what your visual will look like, break it down to who is the subject, what is the purpose of the visual, and then who is the audience. So let me go into a little bit of an example of a real life subject, purpose, and audience. Last year, the Health Forum conducted a survey from partners we work with from across the country to identify the landscape of our communities. We looked under communities to see how they were affected by the Affordable Care Act. So we surveyed over 6,000 Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across 10 states during the Affordable Care Act's last enrollment period. What did we learn? Enrollment assistance played a major role in getting our communities covered. With the information we gathered, we learned that different outreach strategies and methods helped our communities get covered. In our survey, we tracked down the different ways we communicated with our communities about the Affordable Care Act. And our survey showed that service providers, family friends, and flyer and brochures were the top 3 ways people learned about the ACA. So again, what's the subject, purpose, and audience? Our subject in this infographic was about enrollment assistance and getting Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders covered. Our purpose was to show that it took different ways of outreach to get information to these communities across the country. And our audience here wasn't necessarily the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. The audience was really those who can help implement better policies and making sure our communities got the information they needed to get covered under the new law. So I do want to make that a notion that sometimes your audience may seem they are the subject, but the subject might not necessarily mean that they are the audience. So if you're trying to push policymakers to change something in policy or the law, then they're your audience. But your subject could be about who the change is affecting. So let me dive into a little bit of what kind of content you could use for your visuals and what's appropriate. I chose 3 of the important ones to me. So the first on my list is using good data. I think a lot of people get confused that if they have data, they can just use it. But sometimes data will tell you the story itself rather than you having to make the data tell your story. So how do you know you have good data? Again, you are not tweaking the numbers or crunching your numbers to fit a story, but your data alone should be the story itself. And I believe we're going to share some tips at the end of this presentation and kind of share some tips online. So I'll have examples of that as well. Another way is compelling information. Your information has to have a story behind it. There's so much information out there that you're over-competing for everybody's attention to get them to take action in some kind of story. So your story needs to have real information that's compelling and relevant to the audience. And then lastly, I think it's really important that all your visuals have some kind of proof in it. So other than data, you should find other forms to prove that your subject and purpose have merit. One way of doing this is getting testimonials from people, using real images and photos, or putting your data into charts and graphs to show some kind of comparison. So here are some tips. We like to use this image a lot. But the reason why we use it a lot is because it is an image of our partners, and somehow the compellingness of this image is like the hands and the people coming together. So my big advice is always use your own images. That's the best way to not get into trouble with taking other people's images, and if there are usage rights, you just don't want to get into that kind of mess. So if you can, use your own images, or every time you have an event, make it a conscious effort to kind of document those events and take pictures, and make sure you have like photo release forms to get people's permission to use those images. Also, use images that capture some kind of action. In this photo, it's a photo of one of our community gardens in the South, and you wouldn't imagine that this photo is from the United States, but this is actually an Asian American community in the South doing farm work, and it's just amazing because it kind of like brings in a different world it shows a different world of our communities, and that they are part of this American landscape. So if you're searching, for example, if you are trying to search for images and photos to use in some kind of visual way to present your work, always make sure that you give proper attribution to who the photo is from. Or if you are searching for images on Google or any kind of iStock image, make sure you check the features under the search tools to make sure that the usage rights are appropriate, so that you don't have to go through any legal ramifications if you don't have the legal rights to them. So I want to go into types of charts you should use. I went to an American Evaluation Association conference a few years back and took a data visualization training with Stephanie Evergreen. She's kind of like my hero. That was one of the best trainings I've ever attended, and I take her research and tips to heart when creating data visuals. So use the right charts and graphs to show your data types and types of charts you should use. So I'm going to go through some of them. I'm going to go through a hierarchy of the most easily viewed charts to the least easily viewed charts. So the top of the list is positioning. So think about these charts as like timelines or showing like progress or in a linear way. This is the most easiest way for people to kind of see data and how data is being represented. The next one is length. Based on this, you could already tell that the length of the purple bar is longer than the other ones. If you put more design speak into this, you could probably like change the order so that the longest length, the more data you have is at the top to the shorter data to the bottom, and then just kind of like play with the colors with it. But again, length is the second most easiest way for people to understand data. The second one is direction. The third one is direction. So whether a line is moving up or down, people can easily see this. And then we're starting to get to the very difficult ways to look at data. A lot of people look at pie charts and think, oh, pie charts are really great to kind of show the different variables of data. Actually, what is seen better is if you use two variables versus more than two or three variables, because you can make a comparison between two things more easily. So if you do choose to do pie charts, try to do pie charts with two variables instead of like 3, 4, or 5. And then to the least used charts are the area charts and the volume charts. So area charts are basically plot points where they show which has more and which has less. But in actuality, when we look at these different plot charts, we don't see the actual size or volume of the data and why it's important or not. So we're just guessing. We can't, like for example, I can't really see if the blue variable is less or bigger than the green variable. So try to avoid using area charts. Also, volume charts are not your best. They take up a lot of space. Nowadays, people like white space. It's easier to read. And it doesn't really have a purpose for like showing the volume of a chart. This could very well just be a length chart. So, yeah, if you do want to get more information on different uses of charts, definitely follow Stephanie Evergreen. Go to her website, and she has a ton of resources on how to better utilize charts and data visualization. The next component that I want to go into in our presentation is kind of talking about the different tools that we already have in our offices, and then the tools that we could potentially use to make better visuals. So I'm going to kind of go between the pros and cons of like different things that we may be coming across. So my motto is become an expert at using the tools you already have. So if your office already has Microsoft Office, make sure you're an expert at all of those tools first before moving on to something more sophisticated. That way you kind of already know what kind of visuals you have in mind for the future. So the pros of using Word documents is you can insert images, you can change typefaces. Word is one of the most common office tools. So every computer that is up to date should have Word already in it. Some cons for using Word, Microsoft Word, is that it is difficult to lay out. Word is usually just used for content and type, so it's not very user-friendly in like laying out pictures, graphs, charts, and images with the text. So that's one thing that goes against using Word for any design purposes. And then you can't really create really sophisticated illustrations using Word. And then the next one is PowerPoint Pros. So PowerPoint is easier to lay out compared to Word and Excel. There's no layout restrictions like Word has. It's a common office tool to create designs and presentations. But some of the cons, like the pros, sorry about that, is that it's difficult to lay out with the limited amount of like objects and shapes that you can use. You need to use Excel first to create a cell of data or charts to then import it into PowerPoint. And you can't create illustrations on your own in PowerPoint unless they're just very simple illustrations. And then the pros of Excel. It's easy to create charts from existing data in Excel. Many chart templates, there are many chart templates that you can use. Like I showed earlier, there's a plot template, there is a area template, there is a direction template. So you name it, they have different kinds. They even have 3D versions. So there are different ways to use data and make it look sophisticated, but many of those chart types make for poor data visuals. So just keep in mind the hierarchy of how to use charts that I mentioned earlier when you're using Excel for visuals. And then there's also limited options for complex design of charts. So you can only use what Excel offers you. Now, if you have the budget to kind of pay for a monthly subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, you have a lot of more leeway. So you can customize any design to your liking. There are less design restrictions, and you have higher quality design. So you could kind of use the Adobe Suite to kind of make designs suitable for web, for print, and for sharing. The cons to using Adobe Creative Cloud, however, is that there is a monthly price. It requires a skill level, and it's a difficult thing to include charts in. So kind of like how we include charts into PowerPoint, we still have to use Excel to import them in. But again, if you do that within the Adobe Creative Cloud, it becomes easier to customize because you can use colors and whatnot. And then lastly, I'm not going to go over all of the different tools for online tools to create visuals, but I did want to touch a little bit on them. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with them because I've tried using them, and they have really great templates. And then there are also free basic versions that you can use from them. But if you want to get sophisticated with visuals, you do have to pay a price for some of their layouts. So it's not free. In order to make it more customized, you have to pay into using their features. And I've also noticed that when you create these visuals, there's a lot slower user experience. So there's a lot of lagging in when you import images and like when you drag images around for layout. It's just not meant to create visuals that quickly. So if you have the patience, definitely go for it. If you're lacking in like what kind of creative ideas you have, have, you could definitely use the templates that are offered online. And there will also be tools towards the end where you can like grab these templates to use as bases for creating your visuals. So that's pretty much on my end. That's it on my end. I'd be happy to answer questions. And please follow the Health Forum online. Here is our website and our social media. We're always on it. And you could also contact me if you have questions. So I think there's a part where I go into questions.
Yes. Thanks, AJ. That was fabulous. A really good walkthrough, and appreciate how you just really unpack what's helpful to start with and kind of walk through and give the why behind this is important. And we have a lot of great questions. And also thanks for adding, AJ, you mentioned a hero of yours that is kind of a go-to resource, and we invited folks in the chat box to share some of theirs as well, which we will add to a resource doc that we'll share with everyone. So thanks for that, and keep that up. And it looks like, AJ, I think Edwina had a great question about, can you share from towards the beginning of your presentation, if you could share where the content curation graphic is from?
Yeah, sure. So one of the great things about the online web is that there are a ton of places where you can gather information and kind of use it for free licensing. And so one of the tools that will be probably shared towards the end of where you could get images is Flickr. And so I frequently use Flickr and look for compelling data visuals. And so let me go to it right now. I'm trying to scan it. So I got this visual on Flickr, and as you can see, it is from a person named Rohit Bangava, and I really love this visual because it talks about the different ways you can get content. I didn't really go into that later on in my presentation, but briefly, he talks about how to aggregate your information, so pulling the most relevant information. And I talked about how relevant and compelling information was important for creating visuals. And then he talks about distillation, so more simplistic form. So how to break down that information so it's easy for people to look at and to kind of like digest. And then he talks about elevation, which is identifying a larger trend or height of importance. And so the way I look at this is how you're going to use the information to present it. So for example, charts. If you're going to do a chart on comparing data, this would be a great way to kind of like show an issue. And then again, he talks about doing a mashup, juxtaposing emerging existing content that you have. And for the Health Forum, we do that a lot. I take a lot of the data that we use in some of our ACA work, and we kind of like compare it to the year before, the data that we create the year before and whatnot. And then lastly, chronology, organizing historical information by the time to show how understanding has evolved. And again, this is just like comparing and showing how time has changed things and whatnot. So these are great tips on how to curate your content. And it's, I think I could make it available as a tool at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And I think kind of related to that is, Melin was asking, how do you know you have compelling information or a compelling image? Maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Sure. So I don't have an example on me right now, but if you all recall back, President Obama created a new program called My Brother's Keeper. So in My Brother's Keeper, a lot of the issues that were being put front was that there are issues about Black and Latino students or young men in the community who weren't faring well compared to other people in the community. And so at the Health Forum, it was really important for us to show that, yes, although Asian Americans have this overall view that we're scoring better in health and education and economic wealth, there are communities that are within our Asian American Native Hawaiian communities that are not doing well. So when the data is not disaggregated and it doesn't show that, it doesn't paint the bigger picture. So the compelling data or the compelling information that we had to share about that was that don't look at the overall data. Look at our disaggregated data. Look at how Pacific Islanders are doing poorly, how they need help too in programs like My Brother's Keeper. So that could be an infographic that I share towards the end as well. So it's information that's not out there that makes something compelling. And I'm sure Matt can attest to some of these questions too.
Yeah, I was going to see. Matt, are you there?
I am.
Anything you wanted to
Can you hear me
add
okay?
to that? Yeah, we can hear you great.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I've just been making a few notes as we've been talking about it and kind of working them into the things I was going to talk about in the beginning. So
great.
If I miss something, maybe we can circle back on the second Q&A. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Sounds excellent. And AJ, in terms of that, is there any other kind of standout tips for somebody beginning in terms of data collection?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not a data researcher. I actually work side by side with my research team to do this kind of work. And so what I do with my colleagues is they kind of present the data to me, and then I kind of remessage it. So I think it's really important once you have the data to kind of sit down and really identify who the data affects, and go back to that subject, that purpose, and the audience of how you could use that data to create visuals. I do have a previous webinar that I did on data collection tips that I can make as a resource at the end of the webinar as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we're making a list of that. That would be really helpful. And maybe just a couple more questions.
Sure.
I think this is something that always comes up in terms, you addressed it in the presentation about attribution and crediting photos. What about photo release forms?
Yes, very important.
Yeah.
So a good example that I have for this is that if you want to use a photo that clearly identifies, let's say, 5 people in an event, you do want to get their permission to use that photo. If you are at a large event and I say a photographer is going around, you could put it in your registration that says photos will be taken during this event. All rights go to said organization. So it kind of varies, but to play it safe, I highly suggest always having photo release forms ready whenever you're at an event or at a place where you can take these photos that really show the kind of work that you do. And there are actually templates of these release forms online that you could easily pull.
Great. You know what? We'll add that to the resource doc, and I know that the organization TechSoup, they had a great series on how to easily and do it effectively attributing photos, say, on social media or a blog post, etc. So we'll share that as well. And maybe one last question, AJ, from Tatiana. Any studies that you know of about what's most attractive to different audiences?
Yeah, well, there's tons of studies. I know Stephanie Evergreen has focused a lot of her studies on that very same thing. So I suggest go to visit her website, stephanieevergreen.com. But in general, it really depends on who your audience is. One of the reasons why I really got into kind of data visualization and using visuals to tell our story is because when I started at the Health Forum, a lot of our work was very policy written heavy. So it was very, there's a lot of jargon in it, and we noticed that although the information we wanted to get out only made sense to policymakers, how did that make sense to people that we were working with to mobilize? So depending on who your audience is, the way your visuals look will change a lot. For policymakers, if you want to put out an infographic, for example, the one I showed earlier, we want it to be something quick and easy, like bullet point ready information for them to see. If we're telling a real life story of a person, we would probably use an image of that person, put a testimonial quote next to that image just to show the complexity and like the environment that that person's coming from. So again, it does vary between the audiences that you work with, but to get more information on that, I highly suggest Stephanie Evergreen, my hero.
Great. Thanks, AJ.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
And well, at the end we'll probably have some time to have a little bit of, if there's any other questions that you can jointly answer, we'll get to that before we do a wrap-up. But thanks very much. Really helpful. And now we're going to hand it over to Matt Scharpnick from Elefint Designs, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself and the work that he does. And let me get you unmuted here, Matt. Are you there?
It's going to be a lot easier than if I try to do it muted.
Sounds good. We hear you fine.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, welcome everybody, and thanks AJ for that. AJ covered a lot of ground there. I'm going to do something slightly different, which is to jump into some case studies and kind of walk you guys through a few pieces that we've done. So I want to show you kind of how we thought about a few pieces, and then I've deconstructed a few data visualizations to say, okay, here's why we made these choices at these points. So I hope that some of the more philosophical stuff that I like to talk about and think about with data visualization makes sense when you guys are able to see it, how it plays out in specific examples like this. Just quickly before I jump in, a little bit about me. I co-founded Elefint Designs. We're a design studio that mixes strategy and design work. And we work with good causes, so nonprofits, NGOs, foundations, social entrepreneurs, et cetera. Basically any organization that has a social mission attached to what they're trying to do. And my role there as the Chief Strategy Officer is kind of running the business side of things, but then also making sure that there's a strategic throughput on all of our projects. So we've found that strategy oftentimes can be kind of high level. It can wind up in certain documents that maybe the executive team knows about, but it isn't something that necessarily gets translated and implemented in day-to-day. Design we found to be this amazing democratizing tool that takes strategic insights and makes it something that everybody can touch and feel and understand. And that was kind of at the heart of creating Elefint Designs, was just noticing that a lot of organizations in the social sector weren't necessarily set up to have great marketing and design. Probably most or all of you are familiar with this, that most social sector organizations don't have marketing departments. Some of the larger ones do, but even those many times do not have design departments. So when you look at the expertise that are needed to build good storytelling materials these days, user experience design, information design, video, all sorts of content strategy, service design, the design field has just boomed and expanded so much over the last number of years, and it's pretty hard for organizations to have all those expertise in-house. So that's what we try to do. Shifting just into data visualization, which is a big part of the work that we do, a few things on the philosophy of it. Data is such a buzzword these days, and I think a lot of people when I speak at conferences and things feel a little bit intimidated, like they know they're supposed to be doing something with data. And I won't get a lot into this, but when I give longer talks, I'll walk through examples of how even some of the most sophisticated organizations really struggle to come up with really compelling stories about their data. And I like to just say that to help put people at ease, that data is sometimes overhyped. And in certain situations, data can do amazing things to convey understanding. But in other situations, it's really hard to figure out what the story is there or how that story is actually going to advance your goals or the goals of your audience. And AJ touched a little bit on audience, and that's an enormous part of the way we think about everything. Is before we design anything, we want to understand what are the organization's most important audiences. And it is almost always plural in the social sector, because you always have maybe a board of directors and the clients that you're trying to reach and the staff, and you're really looking at people who come from very different stratas of society often. And you may have to create messaging that works for all of those people. So we look at what are their goals for each of those audiences, what is the organization hoping to get from them, and where are those points of intersection where everybody gets what they want. And that's really where we start off before we do any kind of design. A couple of specifics to think about on the philosophy of data visualization is there's definitely a moral component to it. Data visualization becomes a really easy way to deceive. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they see a graph or a chart, assign it far too much credibility. And just because something is a graph or a chart doesn't mean it's scientific. Anybody can make a graph or a chart these days. So as consumers of data, we have to be a bit more skeptical. And as producers of data visualizations, we have to know what we're doing so we don't inadvertently present the wrong data. And we have to be really honest and careful that we're not manipulating data to reach some kind of conclusion that we want, because one, it's just dishonest and I think it's wrong, but it'll also, I think, come back to haunt you in the end. So knowing what you're doing from a data viz standpoint is helpful for that. A lot of times people think about communicating data visualizations only with external audiences, and I think there's a big movement in the data world right now, especially in the social sector, to use data for continuous improvement. I think this has lagged a little bit behind because people often frame their data in terms of what their funders are looking for. So let's report on all the things that the foundation wants for this particular grant. And that's necessary, and you could argue whether or not that's a good thing. There's interesting arguments on both sides. But I would just say in addition to that, it's good for organizations to do their own evaluations using data of how effective they're being as an organization. Can you monitor your own improvement over time? And I think that's something that more and more organizations are doing, and that will ultimately lead to the organization succeeding and creating more impact, which is at the end of the day what we're trying to do. When we look into producing different kinds of deliverables, we are talking about data visualization here, and that'll be mostly what I cover. There's an infographic at the end, and I'll kind of tell you why I use two different terms for those things. But sometimes people approach us with a deliverable already in mind. And I would just sort of caution people against doing that. Sometimes you know you need an infographic, and that's great. And if that totally makes sense and it's clear why, that's fine. Sometimes people see a really cool data visualization and they say, oh, we need one of those. And then they try to find what they need to put it together. And I think at the end of the day, it's really nice to think about what kind of story you want to tell, and then approach somebody who's really good at multiple kinds of storytelling that can help you work through that, whether that's someone on your internal team, whether that's using resources on the web, or whether that's coming to someone like us, a design studio that does storytelling in a few different formats, and figuring out, okay, who's the audience, what are we trying to get them to do, and then what will be the best deliverable for that. So once we decide that a data visualization is something we want to do, we try to mix a couple different worlds together. So earlier people had asked about heroes in data viz, and Edward Tufte is definitely one of the people. I'm seeing that some people are wondering if I'm going to advance some slides. I am. I'll only stay on this slide for a little bit longer, and then the rest moves pretty quick through a lot of slides. So sorry if you're getting bored staring at my face. You won't have to do it much longer. I just wanted to do a little intro here on some of this. So Edward Tufte is one of the best people in terms of the sort of scientific side of information design, the academic field. He's kind of the #1 person most people look at. His stuff is definitely embedded in a lot of what I'm going to show you here. We try to mix what he talks about with really engaging and intuitive things, because these days if you're flashing up something on the web, it not only has to have really solid information design principles, but it also has to be something that grabs people's attention or they may not look at it at all. And so mixing all those things together is what we go for. And as I start to show some examples here, hopefully you guys will think that we've done that pretty well. So let me move forward so we have a little more visual thing going forward. We have an offshoot that we created from Elefint Designs called Infograph. If you guys want to check it out, it's just the word infograph with the dot before the PH. That's the URL. And our most recent subject that we're working on for it is vaccines. And are vaccines safe? Should people get them? Why or why not? Why do people not want to get them? We're just exploring the issue. We don't really take a position on Infograph. What we do is we try to use information out there and data visualizations and infographics to illuminate. And this was the first crack that someone on our team took at it. And I just wanted to point out why something like this is really problematic. There's a few really simple examples that I hope jump out to people. One thing you'll notice is if you look on the bottom right corner, the difference between 1 in 14,000 and 1 in 1 million are almost indistinguishable. And I'll include the infograph link. I see someone's looking for that. I'll make sure you guys get that. You can't even tell the difference between 1 in 14,000 and 1 in 1 million, but those are enormous differences. So when you start to work with pie charts, that is one example of some of the many problems that you can experience with them. So this is another piece of it where we started to get into more and more pie charts. And I think from an information design standpoint, I was pointing out the problem. But even from an engaging standpoint, once you start to see 4, 5, 6, 7 pie charts, I think it gets pretty boring. So someone on our team took a crack at a second approach, and that was this. And the idea here is something that you see in a lot of infographic work, which is where people often take something related to the data, some kind of theme. Here it's pill bottles because we're talking about vaccines, or it's the actual thing that the syringe goes into. Everyone here probably knows the name of that better than I do. But, you know, it's cute, it's thematic, it draws your attention in, but it's not very good information design because I'm not really sure what you're measuring here. So is that the height of the bottle that's measuring the difference? Is it the area? If it's the area, it becomes a little problematic with an awkward shape like that. And you see these things all the time in infographics, is that, you know, maybe somebody will make something in the shape of a foot or in the shape of a house, and they'll arrange the data to make a cute picture. And while that may work from an engagement standpoint, it doesn't work too well from an information design standpoint. Once someone spends time with it, you're really missing out on a lot of opportunities in the data. This is another slide on that same piece. And the different colors here were meant to be, yellow was mild side effects, orange was moderate, and red was severe. And when I'm looking at the disease on the left and the vaccine on the right, and I'm trying to compare these two, I get completely lost and confused on this. So we took a third shot at it, and we really focused on doing good information design. And this is what we came up with. So what we have here are the side effects of the disease on the left, the side effects of the vaccine on the right, and you can compare them. And you can see severity and frequency. And to me, this is nice to look at. It's engaging, and it also has really good information if you want to spend time that hopefully allows people to make better decisions. So now, no piece is perfect, and I'll talk about this in a second with this U.S. debt one as well. You can keep going and improving it and adding more layers of information. There's also things you might say, well, you know, you're comparing the disease, which not everyone's going to get if they don't get the vaccine, to the side effects of the vaccine, which everyone's subject to if they get the vaccine. So I think you just want to do your best to understand how people are thinking about a given issue, how sophisticated the arguments around that, and can you give them a tool that helps them understand a little bit deeper than the way the conversation is going now. And again, that will be something I explore a lot in the next piece. And if you can't get it perfect, if you acknowledge, hey, there's a lot of other pieces here, there's data that was missing, or there's other areas that we couldn't explore in this piece, sometimes it's nice to just make those clear to people. So we might post this on a blog, and we might say, here's where we got our data from. It's always good to list your sources. And then to say, you know, we wanted to explore the frequency of people getting the disease if they didn't get the vaccine, but it was really complicated because it was based on herd immunity, and in certain places it was more common than others, and it just was too much for this piece. But if you're interested in all that, here's a few things you might want to explore. So you're at least acknowledging to people that you get what's missing and maybe giving them some tools to look into it. Okay, so the next two examples are me deconstructing pieces that we created step by step and showing you guys why. And this is not our piece. This is the piece we were trying to sort of respond to. There was a lot of discussion in the 2012 election, yes, about the U.S. debt. And we saw that a lot of people were simplifying it. So this kind of hockey stick graph basically makes it sound like the U.S. debt is just out of control. You see how it was low, and it's gone up and up and up, and now it's spiking. And we thought the first problem with that was that it doesn't adjust for inflation. So we felt it would be a far more honest graph to do it as a percentage of GDP. So this goes back to understanding, you know, the honesty behind data visualizations. Is that previous graph technically accurate? Sure, they didn't put false information. But is it really honest? I would say no, because showing numbers that don't adjust for inflation to make the argument that something has increased is not a very honest argument. Now, we see when we adjust it for inflation here, then yes, the debt has been rising, and it actually is close to a peak, but it's actually not the highest it's ever been. Excuse me. So we think that's a more honest representation of that. Now, this is something called direct labeling. So this goes back again to thinking about your audience and thinking about what information might be most interesting to them. And because a lot of the discussions around the U.S. debt were about it rising, we thought putting the highest and the lowest points would be really great. And then we want to know sort of what areas we're measuring, so we're showing the beginning and the end points. So these are just 4 things we added in that take this somewhat abstract graph and gives you an idea of a trend, and it gives you a little bit more information. And a lot of the theme of what I'm going to be talking about through this piece is something called data density, and you'll see that a lot in Edward Tufte's work, which is how can I get the most amount of information possible in a piece? And then I would say, in addition to that, doing that in a way that doesn't make it too dense or too difficult for people to understand. And that's a bit of a balancing act. So this is the next layer of information that we added, which was who controlled the presidency, because at that time you had a lot of people blaming Bush or Obama for certain levels of debt, and we wanted to take a look at, okay, well, how did the debt move around under different presidents of different parties? And as you look into this, you can start to see, okay, well, it's not so clear that one party contributes to the debt more than others. There's actually quite a bit of variance in that. But as we started to think about it even more, we thought, you know, is that even really the most honest piece? Because it's not simply the president who contributes to the debt, it's also the Congress. The Congress allocates the money and approves it, so we should probably add that information for people. So then now you see the line above is the party in control of the Senate. I hope you guys can see that. I know some of it's kind of small. And part of it is the line below is who controls the U.S. House. So this gives you a lot more information about who actually controls our spending, and we think adds to the nuance of the argument. I'm just going to interrupt myself real quick here. I'm noticing some comments about this study that walks through each of these steps. So if you feel like I'm going a little too fast, there's a lot of information in here, and you want to know a little bit more about how we made these decisions, there's a link that's just been posted in the chat that you can download for free. We just ask for your email, and then you can have this case study and look through it on your own time if this is going too quick for you. One other thing I want to say about data visualizations, which I think this piece illuminates, is if you look, there's an enormous chunk from like, it's even too small for me to see, but the 50s until about the 1980, I think, where Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. We had a number of younger viewers who saw this, who weren't alive during that time, who were really surprised by that because they've lived in an era where the houses of Congress and even the presidency are flip-flopping between the parties pretty regularly. So that's kind of something cool about data visualization is you might set out to tell one story, but if you create a really dense piece with really good information, 4 or 5 other stories that you didn't expect might emerge. Maybe the simplest example of that is to think about a map. I might look at California. Somebody else on this call might be interested in what's going on in Alaska. We can all easily go to the pieces of the map that have the information we want, and it doesn't hurt us that there's extra information there. So a really good data visualization allows everybody to get what they want without it clogging and getting in the way of everybody else, which is, it takes a certain skill set to be able to create that. So this is another piece we added. I don't know if you noticed these gray bars just appeared behind the graph, and we were talking to economists as we created it, and they recommended showing periods of recession because a lot of them said, you know, political parties are going to claim they like to keep spending down or they're going to make different claims about it. But at the end of the day, if you find yourself in a period of recession, you're going to increase spending to get out of it. It's basic economics. So we added these in, and it's kind of interesting now as you go through and you see these gray bars, you can see that, yeah, it does tend to flatten out if it was going down, or it tends to start to curve up if it was flat during these periods of recession. And just from an information design standpoint, we made them gray bars and we put them in the background. So hopefully it's really easy to see how they relate to the graph, sort of this third dimension. But hopefully it doesn't get in the way. We didn't want something to overcrowd it. So again, making more information density, but doing it in a subtle way that doesn't overpower the piece is really important. Then we showed all the different presidents monitored on the same timeline, so you can relate it to the information above if you want. But this just shows their budget deficits and surpluses. So people can see, oh, well, did Reagan run a deficit? Did Clinton? You can jump to that information. And excuse me, finally, we added in the U.S. ratio of debt to other countries. So you can see what is the debt to GDP ratio of the United States compared to a bunch of other different countries. And so that's an important piece for data visualization as well, is context. When we create pieces, we often want to show one main thing with a lot of information, but setting it in context so people can say, well, yeah, okay, I get this about the history of the United States, but how does that relate to other countries? And the snapshot of where they're at right now, that will hopefully deepen the insights. Okay, done with that piece. I'm just going to walk us through one more in detail here. Around the same time, we were seeing debt issues internationally. And this is a piece we did on Japan. So if you guys remember, and obviously this is fresh in people's minds again, Italy and Greece were having a lot of issues with debt a few years ago. And Greece, again, obviously is in the news. And so what this is if you look on one axis, it's the percentage, it's the debt as a percentage of GDP for the country. And if you look on the other, it's the debt per capita. So basically, the size of the circle is overall in dollars how much debt you have. So if you're more to the bottom left, you're probably better covering your debt. If you're more to the top right, then you're probably getting in trouble. And if your circle's big and you're more to the top right, then the rest of the world has to be a little bit concerned because you have a large economy and it could affect them. So we can look at a bunch of different countries here and see where they land. And now let's add in, that's the United States. So kind of interesting as you translate it from our other. If you look at the overall size of the circle, enormous compared to all the others. So if someone wanted to make the argument that the U.S. has far too much debt, then you might say, okay, wow, look at that circle. It's so much bigger than the others. But if you look at the center point of the circle, it's kind of in the average. So you might be able to say there, well, maybe it's not as serious. So again, a lot of information design hopefully richens the story, and it doesn't allow someone to fool you with a very simplistic narrative, but it gives you the tools to really dig deeper into what different stories are there. Okay, now we've added Greece and Italy. So you can see Greece and Italy are more to the top right. They're kind of outliers almost in this graph, and that's why people were concerned with them. And if you see, Italy is the purple circle that was added. It's much larger than Greece. So that was really why a lot of people were concerned when Italy started to have debt issues. But now you look, and that's Japan. If you missed it, it's to the top right there. It doesn't even look like it's on the graph. So I love this visualization because it so clearly states what a problem Japanese debt is. And it's nowhere near the other circles, and it's about the exact same size as the United States. So this is a potential landmine for the entire U.S. economy. They've got an enormous amount of debt, especially compared to how many people they have and the size of their economy. So then the next question might be, well, if Japan is such an issue, why do we hear about Greece and Italy and these other pieces? So that's where, again, adding context can help. So down here, we show the amount of, this is essentially the price of debt. So what does it cost a country to borrow money? And I know some of this can get a little bit technical, but this is just a zoomed in summary I made of some of those charts showing Japan, the United States, Italy, and Greece. So this is why people are concerned about Greece, because Greece has to borrow money at 35%. And I don't know about people on the call, but if I have to borrow money at 35%, that's not something I'm going to be able to keep up for very long. Italy was about 7% at the time this was made. People were very concerned about it. So even though Japan is off the charts in terms of these debt issues, they're able to borrow money at under 1%, which affords them the ability to keep this up for a long time. Now, if that number rises, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Just trying to cover a lot about you can think about when you do data visualization, how we try to do it well. Moving to a slightly different piece here, this is something that we did for PHI and health and how it helps business to think about preventing disease. So not all information design is about quantitative data and crunching numbers and doing graphs like we did. A lot of information design can be about presenting a program, a process, the organization's mission, an important issue that you want to highlight. We'll have people that come to us because they want to present something to Congress, either at a hearing or to congressional staffers, or this particular piece was sent around quite a bit on their blog and throughout the internet and got them a lot of traffic. And pieces like this still need to be done well. There's still a lot of information design principles that go into them, even though they're not quantitative. And I think we have an article that I can include a link to, which is all about where people tend to go wrong around this kind of information design. But you'll see those infographics that are just way too much information, a lot of scrolling, it's kind of overwhelming, and you wonder, was that really the best format for it? Or in contrast, you might see something with really large charts and graphs, and when you think about it, writing a paragraph might have conveyed that information better. So that's where you want to think through, is this the right format? And this is just one piece that we've done like this, but if you go to our website, we've done a bunch of different non-quantitative infographics that walk people through a process or a mission or something like that. And you can kind of see, we generally try to do 2 or 3 chunks that people can focus on that are related to each other, but that are separated visually, so that this is a digestible amount of information. Someone can hopefully learn a lot about an issue in a very short period of time by looking at this, but they don't get overwhelmed. That's really our goal. So before just opening it up for Q&A, I guess I would just, and I can share links to all these things, but just to recap some of the resources around some of this stuff, definitely take a look at our case study on the U.S. debt to learn more about how we did that one. We have an article on my LinkedIn page that's about, I think it's 4 or 5 different things that people typically do wrong with data visualization. If you're trying to construct some of these things on your own, one really cool resource, if you guys don't know about it, is called the Noun Project. This is something I thought of when we were talking about usage rights earlier. There's a lot of open source icons and things that can be used for infographics, and it's open for everybody to use. Most of it is just common licensed. The IO conference, spelled EYEO, is an amazing event of some people who do this stuff really, really well. Creative coders, data visualization people doing this at a high level. Definitely would recommend it for people who are really interested in this stuff, but you can also just check out their site and their blog and learn more about the stuff that they're doing. Edward Tufte, again, is kind of the main academic that people look to with information design, and he's got some great books out there. He leads about a half to full day workshop that I highly recommend. And then also just mixing what he does with making things really fun and engaging for people, and realizing that the best information design sometimes takes people a little bit of time to sit with it and really realize how much information is there. And you might have to draw them in a little bit before they're going to give you that much time. So mixing those two things is really what we often go for. So I will now stop talking and leave it open for questions.
Thanks, Matt. Excellent presentation. It's really rich content, and I think that we got some great questions related to how you were deconstructing them and kind of revealing some of the principles and practices behind. Charles had a question about how developed is the evidence base for best practices in public health data viz?
Sorry, so how much has evidence shown that these kinds of design are effective in that field?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have the answer to that. I mean, as a design studio, we're producing these things for people, and, what they do with it depends a lot. I mean, we talk about this a lot at our design studio, is sort of how you evaluate the return on design of something. And we've dug into it for years now, and it's actually a really hard thing to answer, because I might give the exact same infographic to 2 different organizations. We don't do that. I'm just saying you could run a test like this. And depending on their audience sizes and depending on how sophisticated their distribution operation is, they're going to have completely different results. So we've seen that with people that do things that are a little bit more productized, or maybe a company. We do a lot of custom work. Everything we do is typically different, so that makes it very hard to evaluate. But with organizations where they might produce similar videos for every single organization, some of those videos get 200 hits or views, and some of those videos get 200,000, and it's almost the same content. So I think that stuff becomes a little hard to evaluate. But what we hear back anecdotally for this piece we did for PHI, for example, they've gotten a lot of great feedback. So they've measured it anecdotally by just what they've heard back from people, and then they've measured it more quantitatively using their Google Analytics. And I believe this piece, and we've heard this on several infographics we've done for people, was their most viewed content on their blog. So that will happen a lot. And then again, there's much deeper questions about what you're going for. When we produce a piece for somebody who's going to congressional staffers, the best evidence probably is going to be, what was the response? Did you have trouble convincing these people of the importance of this issue or explaining the nuances of it? And now that you had this piece, did you find that much easier? Because that's really their goal. If someone's trying to attract a lot of attention to their site, for example, because there's something they want to promote, then you're probably going to look more at your Google Analytics and measure it. So there's a lot of factors that are that depend on what you're trying to do with it.
And kind of related to that, just a question, when should you use infographics? There's a wealth of them online, and Donna had a good question in terms of, any ideas in terms of being really understanding strategically when and where to use them as opposed to some other type of visual or graphic?
Sure. A little bit hard to answer in the abstract, because when people come to us, we have a conversation about what they're trying to accomplish, and that is usually what leads us to say, you know what, I think that's going to be better as an animated motion graphic video, or that sounds like it would be perfect for a data visualization. And on some of our more complex projects, we might even do an entire exploratory phase before we even decide on what the end output is going to be. So just depending on your resources, how much you can spend investigating something, how important it is that it's effective, it takes a little time to figure that out. But in a broad sense, I would say, something, if you have information that can surprise and delight people, or if you've got a lot of disparate information that can be put together into one piece and consolidated. Again, some of the specifics I mentioned earlier, if you want to talk about how a program works, a process works, you want to show the mission of an organization. The one we have on the screen was they wanted to hit some key points about how prevention is good for business. We've had other clients who had complex membership models for their nonprofit, and they wanted to show people, hey, here's what it means to be a member. I know it's kind of confusing, but this infographic walks you through it. You can see some examples of that kind of stuff on our site. We've had other organizations. We worked with Architecture for Humanity a number of years ago, and people were calling them up wanting to come build houses. They thought they were essentially what Habitat for Humanity is, because their name is kind of similar and indicates that. But in reality, that wasn't an opportunity that they had. So they had us create an infographic that walked people through how they could engage with them. So, there's many different examples like that on our site.
Thanks, Matt. And just so everyone knows, we've gotten really great links and sites, and those that you've shared, those that both our presenters have shared, and we'll definitely give you access to those by putting them on our resource document. And I'm going to unmute AJ as well, because we have a really great question from, from Mylene that I think that is something that comes up a lot. It's like, what exactly is the thought process or maybe the workflow or approach in terms of creating these visuals, especially for folks that are just getting started?
Right. So I come from a more visual perspective, I know a lot of people can learn orally, but I've gone to art school, and a lot of the first things that they teach you in art school is never to go to the computer first, but it's to go to the pen and paper. And so my initial process is just to sketch things out and see kind of how I want to lay things out. So once you have your subject, purpose, and audience, then go to paper and pen and go from there. And once you have solid versions or refined versions of your sketches or your different concepts, then go move on to a computer and see how you can make those sketches come alive. But really the process goes to kind of having all of that information ahead of time, having the right data, having the right visuals at hand, and just being an expert at the tool you're using to create those illustrations.
And Matt, did you have anything in terms of your own process in your shop that you would, some insights to share there?
I think that's great in terms of sketching. We typically structure a lot of our design. We do a lot of different kinds of design, whether it's website stuff or data visualizations. But it always starts, again, with the strategic understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. Then, we'll often move into sketching things out because you don't want to invest yourself too much in any visual design approach until you're sure that the content and the location of everything is right. And so sometimes when people jump into the visual design, they'll get attached to it. So we often go through wireframing or sketching phases, and then we move into the visual design. And then I think, one part of the process that we're seeing more and more of that I would definitely encourage people to do, and that I think clients don't ask for enough, but they seem open to when we bring it up, is doing more iteration. We still seem to have a lot of a project orientation in this world where people want to create something and then they want to move on. And I think, you might get yourself 90% of the way there and move on. And if you had gone back and realized that people just needed these little tweaks, it could have been 5 times more effective. So I think adding that into the process is really key.
Yeah.
I just saw another question too. I don't know if you wanted me to tackle it about presenting too much data on an infographic.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly that I think that's an enormous thing with art and design in general, is knowing when to stop. And I think definitely with our U.S. debt piece, we kept adding and kept adding. When you look at the original questions we were trying to ask, we were trying to move people away from the debt just looking like it was hockey sticking, when there was obviously a more nuanced way of looking at it. People were focusing on the president and not Congress, so we wanted to accomplish that. And I think at that point we thought maybe we were done, but we felt it was worth showing to a few people. And then when we had some people who were really good with economics look at it, that's where they said, you have to have a piece about recessions if you want to talk about the debt. And once we had that in, we felt, wow, this is really good. We had some people who were really academic about this stuff that said, there's 3 or 4 more factors you could add, but I think you've gotten, 90% of it in that piece. So for us at that point, to clutter it up with 4 or 5 more factors just to add 10% more was probably going to hurt it more than help it. So that's a little bit of an intuition you develop when you do these after a while.
Great, thank you. And Mary had a question about, can you speak to the power of pictograms and their role in infographics?
Pictograms. I'm not sure what she means by that, but let me...
Mary, are you there? You could unmute your phone if you wanted to ask, kind of maybe related to something that you've seen. You can ask a question if you press *7. That'll unmute your phone if you're still with us. And maybe while we're waiting for Mary for that, Ruth had a question about what's the project that has the open source icons that you mentioned, Matt?
That's the Noun Project. And
okay.
That might be what she means. I know some people call icons pictograms, so maybe those are the same answer. But yeah, the Noun Project is a great resource.
Great. And one kind of last question before we move on. You mentioned knowing when to stop. It's something that's common with an artist, knowing like, well, when is this done on my canvas? What about knowing how to start? When do you know it's best to consider outsourcing this type of work, and when is it a good idea to think about, hey, we can do this in-house?
Sure. Well, in my experience, most organizations just don't have or even need the capacity in-house to produce a lot of this kind of work, unless they're an organization that's putting out data visualizations on a continuous basis. It may not make sense for them to employ an in-house information designer. So if they have that and that person is able to do that to the quality that they like, then that's great. They can keep that person busy. In our experience, most organizations don't have that. And so if they have the budget, then I think hiring a design studio that specializes in this stuff is going to get you the best result in the quickest amount of time. If you have all the time in the world but not a lot of money, then even if you have a graphic designer that you work with, they could educate themselves on best practices and play around with it and maybe be able to do it a little bit cheaper if you have somebody in-house, for example, who's decently good with graphic design. It depends on the level of quality it has to be at as well. I don't think someone needs to spend many thousands of dollars to create something that they're just going to show at a board meeting. There I would focus more on what really matters to the board and what's that key piece of information. And maybe there's a way for you to do that in Excel and just use some really simple information design principles to make it better. But I think if you're trying to create something that's really compelling and you want it to last for a long time and you can invest in it, then that's the way to do it. And so where you get started is, I think, dependent on what your goals are.
Thanks, Matt. And AJ, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to echo Matt. For us as a nonprofit, we don't have a lot of the time to kind of put into creating visuals for every product that we come up with. And like Matt said, sometimes your research or your data doesn't have to be in an infographic form or a visual form, and it really depends on the audiences you are reaching out to regarding your research. But definitely coming up with the goals to why you're creating that and seeing if that fits your capacity of your staff in creating them. There are other things that to help develop staff, like General Assembly offers great illustration classes, ways to learn Illustrator or Adobe InDesign, or even just to look at think about data visualization as a tool for showing your work. So if organizations or agencies have the capacity to budget that out to train the staff to do it, I think it's worth it to get the most basic stuff done. But if you want something really sophisticated, I would go to someone like Matt.
Thanks.
Thanks, AJ. And one last question before kind of digging in and just getting your key takeaways before we move forward. Maylin was asking, when showing multiple numbers like we see up here on the Prevention Means Business infographic, is there any guideline to follow in terms of how many numbers to show?
No, I think there's not, always show 7 numbers or something like that. I think in terms of sections, we generally, if you look at a lot of our pieces, they might have a main section with anywhere from 1 to 3 sidebars that enrich it. This one, the sections are actually a little more evenly represented. There isn't one of them that sort of dominates, whereas if you go back to the Japan infographic, or you clearly see one main piece with some smaller pieces, or if you go back to the U.S. debt one, we also have one definitely main piece with a couple little sidebars. But I think in terms of the actual numbers, again, it has to be back to the story. So each of these pieces were built to accomplish something. We saw that there was a hole in people's understanding around a topic. And so we always ask ourselves, does adding one more fact or figure or image or paragraph to this go a lot deeper into helping the person understand where they're getting stuck or where there's misinformation out there? Or does it add only a tiny bit and it clutters it? Because the more you add, the more attention you take away from everything that's already there. So that is the balance that you have to strike. Do I get more out of adding it, or do I get more out of letting the stuff that's already there shine? And then if people want to research it more and go deeper into it, they can. So having a little bit of a deeper understanding of the audience and where the issue is in most people's minds and what are really the most important pieces that need to be filled in for people will help make those decisions much easier.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And maybe just before we move in to just sharing a few other resources before our wrap-up, if both you and AJ can just share maybe kind of a top-of-mind takeaway that you think would be most helpful for our audience moving forward when they think about implementing this back home at their organization.
Sure. AJ, do you want to start?
Sure. I think I mentioned it earlier today before I got into comparing the different programs or design software you could use to creating your visuals. But mine is really to be an expert in the tools that you already have. I wouldn't waste time buying Adobe Creative Cloud if it's not in your budget. But if you can really make PowerPoint work, and I've seen this done many times, then go with that. And become an expert at it. My other takeaway that I do want to share is going back to the whole subject, purpose, and audience, is that your audience isn't necessarily the subject. So if you come up with what your subject is, don't forget that your goal of your visual is really for the audience to see and for them to have a reaction to it. And it's not necessarily about who the subject will be about. So those are my two big takeaways.
Yeah. Am I still unmuted?
No, you're there, Matt.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so I think the point about the audience is essential, and I would just totally agree with that everything should just start with, what is the purpose of this piece and for who, and what do they care about, and what's going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And I can't say that enough times because people get excited about doing something, and sometimes that excitement or that direction they've already decided on gets in the way of actually thinking about what matters to the people who are going to actually consume this piece. And then the other thing I would say is maybe the other side of the coin of what AJ started with there was just, trying to do something different and outside the box, and remembering that the point of these organizations is to serve somebody, is to have some impact in people's lives. And all too often we see people creating an annual report in print form and mailing it out to people and having absolutely no idea if it's been effective, not even anecdotally, almost never quantitatively. So I would say, taking a step back and not creating a website because everybody has a website or an infographic because everyone does, but saying, what are we really trying to do here? Maybe we can do something that nobody else has done, or maybe we can do something that private sector companies have done really effectively but hasn't really reached out to the nonprofit sector. And I think a lot of times the social sector can be a little bit conservative, and there's good reasons for that, but at the same time it can leave them very far behind the most cutting edge things. And by the time you get around to doing an infographic and you're comfortable with it, 1,000 other organizations already have them, and it's not a very engaging thing for people anymore. So I would urge people to sort of be strategic and then be willing to think outside the box.
Great. Those are good words of wisdom from both of you. I love that. Thank you so much. And just want to say thank you for doing this because we know I'm very busy, and this is just an area that I think is very new and unfamiliar for many of us. And I'm sorry that Vicki couldn't join us as well today, as she was going to share a little bit more in terms of specific tools to kind of take that leap, as AJ and Matt mentioned. But what we tried to do moving forward is, as they said, to encourage you to think outside the box, even outside of what you think you can do personally, and see yourself as being able and having the tools at hand to get creative, to experiment, and to do something differently, as Matt said and AJ mentioned, with wherever you're at, with whatever skills you might have, and then, as AJ said, to try and build your expertise up. So we have a roundup here that we're going to share with folks after the event, both with the slides and the resources, just some tools that are out there that are low barrier, easy to use in terms of creating images as well as graphics, and how to source some of that content. Mentioned AJ Flickr. There's also sites like Pixabay and Unsplash, and I know that Buffer's article has a wealth of sources for images. And then there's also a list of tools that you can use online to create these infographics. So we will share that with you after the event. And then in addition, we have some other resources to explore that we've shared in past events. We have a PDF of a designer's approach and some best practices in terms of design from Leslie Yang, who was a graphic designer for PolicyLink, a local organization, and was also involved in user experience. And then we also will have a resource doc from a prior event with lots of listings of books, reports, articles, and design tools that are kind of framed out as both Matt and AJ sussed out in terms of, are you a beginner, intermediate, and some things that take just a little bit more experience, like the Adobe Creative Suite. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and to take on this kind of challenge and think, how can you use what you've learned today? What baby step, what kind of small bet can you make in terms of learning from where you're at, and just keep practicing and see about being able to get better and become effective at this visual storytelling. And we'll have a brief survey, just a couple minutes, a few questions after the event. We'd love to hear back from you, and this is our last event, so please share your thoughts and any suggestions for the future. And with that, I'll just say thank you so much to our presenters. That was excellent. And all of you for joining us over this time. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. And stay tuned for links to the webinar recording, the slides, and the resources, and we'll be in touch. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Matt and AJ. Excellent job.
Thank you.
Thanks
Have
a
a
lot.
great rest of the day, all.